Hello, hello. I'm Nancy Halpern, and I'm here with my friend and colleague Julian Roberts. Hello, Julian.
Hello, Nancy. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So we are here to talk about a mystery topic because, that we're going to announce right now, we might have given you some hints, but it's what do you do when your star performer is your biggest problem? The person who perhaps does a great job in terms of operations, creating revenue, getting things done, but people don't really want to work with them, or they take up a whole lot of your time. And I've seen this happen a lot in high performing teams and organizations, and managers really struggle with this. Is this something you've seen a lot, Julian? And what are your ideas about it?
Yeah, I've observed it myself in teams I've run myself, but I've also observed it in other teams. So, as in from afar. And it is interesting because you're in that dilemma, aren't you? You've got somebody who's doing really well, excelling, whether they're bringing in sales or they're being extremely productive, innovative. But along the way, they're hacking off loads of people, bad behaviors, and and I think it's one difficult one to challenge in a sense of because you feel quite emotive about it because you're thinking, oh, don't upset the apple cart because they're concerned about what they may do or they may leave us and all this sort of stuff. And I think that the perspective I have is have a bigger perspective on than that person because life isn't all about one person. We are not all indispensable in that sense, and I think it's
Hmm.
good to have that perspective that actually your sole business is not dependent on this single person. Actually, stand back a little bit and think about the bigger problem. And I think because often we get caught up, oh, there might be revenues of 20% more than everybody else, but actually they are impacting everybody else who are going below. And so this, some of the parts are significantly less. And I think it's that important thing is to sort of play back and think, actually, what can we do about this? So how do we do that? How do we go and tackle? Because we got to tackle it, and you got to head on with it. I mean, I love to hear your thoughts because you love grabbing nettles and thorns and all sorts of
I
things, don't you?
love prickly things. It's true. I don't know why. Well, the first thing is I I remember telling a couple of clients over the years, no one as a leader should hold you emotional hostage. And
Mm.
that's what happens, just as you've said, people are scared that this person will walk and take away all the candy that everyone else eats. So, one thing I've come up with in dealing with it, and I'm actually kind of proud of this, Julian, because I hadn't thought of it this way until recently, is doing an actual cost benefit analysis. Like,
Mm.
what that person brings in terms of dollars, let's say, or what their effort results in, but do you know what they actually cost you? So, on top of their salary or compensation, calculate how much of your time as a manager they take up on, let's say, weekly or monthly basis. Calculate that percentage of your salary and add that onto the cost that they cost you. Then also take the time your other people come and complain about them or won't work with them and add that to the cost. And at some point, oh, and by the way, not just that, how much time do you spend thinking about them? Because I'll bet that's at least twice as much as the time you spend interacting with them. So take that number of hours, divided
Mm.
by a total week, divided by your salary, throw that in. And all of a sudden, you're going to actually have a very different calculation because you pay one way or the other. So, what is that person actually costing you? And I did have a client go through a version of this approach, and they decided there was only one way to correct the behavior because they really didn't want to lose the person, but they also didn't want to deal with the behavior anymore. They told them that every time they hear about an incident, in this case it was bullying, they would knock 5 grand off their bonus.
Wow.
Wow. And see and that got their attention. And
Got my
that's the
attention.
see, I woke you right up at the end of the day. Well, see, but that's the thing. I think you have to know what motivates that difficult talent. Sometimes it's that they want a platform, so everyone listens to them.
Mm.
Other times it is a financial motivation. Because the thing you have to think about is not just that cost calculation, but are you a walking, sitting hypocrite? If your organization has espoused a set of core values that
Mm.
we don't tolerate bad behavior, and yet as a leader you are tolerating it because you don't want to risk the hit to revenue or something else, your team's going to look at you, and it's a cost to your reputation that you may not want to take on.
Mm. No, and I like that cost benefit aspect, because I think that takes out the emotion as well. Because often we get caught up in the emotion of how great somebody is, or we can't lose them. But actually, doing that cost benefit is really a valuable thing to do. And I think we do need to head on with the individual in terms of dealing with it. As you're right, yeah, other people are observing you. Are you going to deal with this? How are you going to go about it? And has a greater impact if you don't do something about it. And I guess in my past of dealing with people, I've always almost what we talked about a few weeks ago, or maybe last week ago, about feedback, where you literally set them aside, and as long as you've observed things. The key thing is, obviously, we hear from other people, but you're going to make sure you observe some of the behaviors they're doing. You can't always get all behaviors, but certainly you start to see some patterns, as we've talked about before. And then you tell them, you're quite specific about it, and you give clear examples of that behavior, and also you demonstrate the impact that's having. And it goes back to, obviously, the wider impact on the business and on the team, but also some of the consequences that may happen with them. Because weirdly, and it's interesting, the £5,000 piece, consequences are a motivator more than giving cash. I know it sounds a little bit wrong way around in this world, but actually consequences are important. But before you get to that, I think it's important for them to get an understanding why they are behaving, because there might be some real issues. There might be some things they're dealing with, and try to sort that out. But get into a place where actually you clearly say, this is not acceptable. This is the impact it's having on the business and other people. How can we get to a place where you're not being like that? And then almost put them on a bit of a watch, really, because they can't just be let go once they've had that conversation. And if it continues, then the conversation goes to more of a, well, it's conversations. I mean, I'm not quite as the old like that, but it's certainly, sort of performance improvement plan, potentially let them go. I mean, you got to point it out to them. Clarity.
Well, I think as a leader, and then I have a question for you, Julian. I think as a leader, you have to make a conscious choice. If you say this person is worth it, I've done the cost benefit analysis, and they're difficult, but they're not destructive. At least be honest that I'm making that choice. If you say this person is absolutely terrible, then at some point you really do have to let them go, which is why I did this. I think so many leaders and managers just get stuck in the fear. They actually never make a decision, which de facto is a decision. But here's the question I really want to ask you. So you were talking about observing the behavior, but there are many times the manager never sees this behavior because the person in question is actually pretty good at managing up. It's with peers and underlings. Underlings are people who report to them, that this behavior shows itself, because then they have more power and they feel more comfortable showing it. So what do you do in that instance, do you think, Julian, if you have several people or even just one person reporting it, but you yourself have never seen it?
I guess for me, I would try and canvass more feedback. I mean, I guess if I can, there's always other people who observe it, whether it's from the person who's either complained to you or talked to you about it or shared it with you or other people. I will canvass more feedback as I can, but I also will still have those conversations of what I've shared with the individual in terms of those, and will elicit something from that as well. Because do you know what, the whole, there's no smoke without fire. There's something going on, and do you know what, you just know, even if somebody's playing with you sort of disingenuously with you, that they are being not like that to other people, and they're just trying to play with you. So for me, I think there's a bit of an intuition that goes on with it as well. It's not always so obvious as clean cut. You observe it, you see it, but I think canvas more information, and you just tend to know what is happening in terms of an intuitive way.
Well, maybe we should also talk about what happens when you have that difficult conversation with the person. One technique I've used a lot with my clients is not talking about when you are in that conversation. Instead of making it about you and your behavior, I suggest they say, for anyone in your position, here are the expectations. And, This organization has a couple of core values that we expect everyone
Yeah.
to live by. Here's what they are. So therefore, even though it isn't that person you're talking to, it's a way to dial down the emotion and what could be perceived as a personal attack by
Mm.
saying it doesn't matter if Mary, Sally, anyone is in this role, I would ask the same thing of them. What techniques would you suggest or have you seen work in those
Yeah, I think
conversations?
I agree. I think it goes back to that when you're giving feedback in terms of making sure what you're aligning to is the values, is the culture, and I find that really important in terms of sharing that and almost putting them in your shoes. And what would you do in my position, and try to get them to see a different perspective? Because I think often people who are doing really well get a little bit caught up with their own sort of glory of how well they're doing. And I think sometimes they need to see a different perspective. And I've often said to them, okay, so what do you think how I would view this if you were me? Or how do you think that person who works for you, how do you think they're perceiving that impacts you're having, or to try and shape them a little bit and seeing different points of view, almost going around various people. And how would my boss view how you're behaving with my team? And it starts to scale things a little bit actually, and by inference of that, actually start to make people think there's actually a wider impact here. Because you know what, people are all looking, they're
Yeah,
observing, and I think people forget that actually observation is one of the biggest ways to make an impact, and that can be positive or negative. People are watching you, not always consciously, but certainly subconsciously, of what you're doing and how you're doing. And weirdly, I know we can't always detect intention and motive in terms of, we can't observe it, and it could be observed behaviors, but actually sometimes you can feel sometimes an intention, and you can feel a sense of what somebody's trying to do. So I've always tried to create that sort of awareness in that individual in terms of a almost 360, I guess.
I think that's really good. I also think, though, after those conversations, some people resort to what I would call boomerang behavior. Like, let's say you have someone who suffers from what I call the smartest guy in the room syndrome, no matter your gender, right? And so they really overtalk, they do all the talking, they talk first, and you give that person, listen, you're really brilliant. And let's say they are, but you need to make space for other people to contribute. I've seen that kind of person just shut down, say, fine, you don't hear from me, I won't say anything, which of course is not what you had said, right? But they get a little pouty. So I think that you have to be on the lookout for that kind of behavior. But I also think during that conversation with your difficult talent, you might say, and by the way, this isn't saying that I want you to not contribute.
Mm.
I want you to find the great, normal curve in the middle and keep benefiting us with all your great ideas. But we also need to make room for everyone else's great ideas and then offer help, in a way, which you're right.
Yeah.
We are getting back to the feedback conversation because that's assuming that person's worth keeping. But I
Yes.
do think it really begins with, do you want to keep them? Is this person worth it to you?
Mm.
Because from there, once you make that decision, that suggests very different paths forward.
Totally. And I think, interestingly, and as you know, I would say this anyway, but get that individual into a place of, you should be obviously praising them for doing some good stuff, because it's not all about the bad stuff they're doing as well, but also trying to take the conversation to a future place of saying, how can you develop better? How can I support you better? What are your aspirations? And it starts to create that sort of more positive mindset. And, if you want to be the next CEO of this company, for example, and they may want to be that, which is fine, these are the sort of the behaviors you might want to think about in terms of getting to that level. Because if you continue in this vein, if you look at our current CEO, they don't sort of operate in those sort of behaviors. In fact, they operate in these ones which align to our values. And it starts to people think, okay, so if I really want to be successful, I need to start thinking about changing something here, and to try and create that sort of internal motivation along the way.
Yeah, and of course, having a slightly dimmer view of humanity, as I do, right? I'll often suggest people share, well, do you want to plateau? Because if you're smart and ambitious, this behavior will plateau you. It will just stall you, which is really the same thing that you're saying. But,
Yeah.
you're much. You're just a kinder person. So on that note, I know that we have to wrap up. So I just want to say thank you, Julian. Thank you, everybody. And I'll see you next week. Right, Julian?
Absolutely. See you next week. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.